Hi, this is Fathom in person, and today I'm going to speak to Andrew Brigden, our COO and Chief Economist, about a recent note that he wrote called Spotting UK Recessions. So in the autumn budget, growth was downgraded to 1.4% for next year. Our own central view is considerably below this. Can you explain why?
Sure. So yes, our forecast for growth next year is just 0.3%. And we expect that there'll be a fairly mild technical recession probably early next year. Why do we think that will happen? I think for a start, the UK's been growing quite a long way above trend for the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, our view is trend growth is somewhere between 0.5% and 1%. So some slowdown was inevitable, but I think the UK's vote to leave the EU and the consequences of that decision are going to hasten the slowdown. So, the main consequences that are important for the economy are an increase in uncertainty, which is going to hold back investment. It will hold back probably consumers' expenditure as well to some extent, but also the big fall in the pound that we saw, which has not been matched, it has led to higher prices which have not been matched by higher wages. That's really putting a squeeze on the household sector. And we had assumed, admittedly, along with pretty much all other forecasters, we'd assumed there'd be a slowdown soon after the referendum, and in the end there wasn't, and everyone got that wrong, more or less. But the fact it hasn't occurred yet, to us it's pain deferred, it's not pain avoided. Households really rode through the first few months by borrowing more and by saving less, but that can only really go on so long. We're in an environment now where savings as a proportion of income are close to all-time lows. The Bank of England is urging banks to impose much tighter conditions on unsecured lending. So yes, we think consumers' expenditure will slow quite sharply into next year as real wages continue to fall, and there won't be a substantial offset, this is what some people expect, a substantial offset either from investment or net trade. It's not the right time with all this uncertainty for firms to invest significantly. In terms of net trade, yes, the pound has fallen a lot, but then exporters have put up their prices almost in parallel. So the foreign currency price that people are offered has hardly changed.
Okay, and your recent note called Spotting UK Recessions responded to criticism or pushback from our clients about our low growth estimate for the UK. So could you tell me about the main points you wrote in there?
Sure, yeah, so we are out on a limb. There are very few other forecasters that are expecting a recession. There are a few others, I believe, but not many. And the consensus in surveys, if you look at the median forecast, is around 1.5%, which is pretty close to what the OBR said yesterday, pretty close to the Bank of England. But the fact is, the consensus and official forecasters as well pretty much never forecast recessions. So, the fact we're forecasting a recession, yes, I admit that doesn't mean there'll be one. The fact that no one else is doesn't mean that we're wrong either.
So how did the Bank of England fare forecasting? So UK economic output fell for 5 consecutive quarters in Q2 2008. So when did they start to forecast a recession?
Yes, so the Bank of England, they very kindly provide a very detailed breakdown, not just of their central view, but of probabilities. And so on the eve of the recession of 2008-9, which began in the second quarter of 2008. So on the eve of that, which was their February 2008 inflation report, they were forecasting growth of almost 2% over the next 4 quarters, and they attached just a 5% chance to output contracting. What actually happened is that the economy contracted nearly 6%, which is the sharpest recession we've had since the Second World War, and they really assigned it pretty much a 0 chance to that happening. That was, on the month before it started. So the Bank of England didn't really see that coming.
And what about other official forecasters? How did they?
Very similar. So the IMF didn't start, in a sense, they didn't forecast the recession. They admitted it about 6 months in. So in the fourth quarter of 2008, when we'd been in recession for 6 months, the Bank of England inflation report first contained the word recession. It predicted a contraction in output, and the IMF predicted a contraction in output in that same quarter, and so did the OECD. But it took 6 months before that happened, so it wasn't really a forecast, it was an acknowledgement.
Of what had happened after the event?
Yes.
And what about our peers, other private forecasters?
Certainly the consensus among those, if you just look at the median forecast, again, that wasn't for a contraction until the fourth quarter, six months in. I think my recollection is that there were 1 or 2 forecasters were predicting a contraction in the August poll conducted by Reuters. But again, that was at least 3 or 4 months into the recession. So yeah, people don't really see these things coming. Tend to spot them after the event, particularly private and public sector, really.
So we shouldn't take comfort in the fact that we're almost alone at the moment forecasting this recession?
No, not particularly. I don't think that the fact that people are not forecasting a recession and that the consensus are all pretty much stuck around 1.5%, that certainly doesn't mean that'll be the outcome. The Bank of England forecast, as I think I mentioned, was close to 2% growth on the eve of that downturn. And interestingly, that was exactly the same forecast they presented in the inflation report just gone, was growth of 1.7% over the next 4 quarters, and I think a 10% chance of contraction.
Thank you, that was very interesting.
Thank you.